Good. Bloodlust, a novel by Jeremy Sinclair. Chapter 1, entitled Sweet Meeting. Paragraph. I walked into the room, and there stood Petal, her silken hair languorously caressing one fair cheek, her lips red and inviting. I walked over to her and slugged her in the mouth. No, change that, Miss Wilcott, to slugged her in the kisser.
Oh, that's a beautiful beginning, Captain Russell. It really is.
I'm afraid it's all rather disgusting, really, but, well, they seem to like the American touch. Well, to proceed.
Always have an orchestra at the weekend, sir. Sort of livens things up.
I'm sure.
Humbug!
Bravo. Bravo, ladies, bravo. I don't think I've ever heard a trio play with such brio.
Stop that music! Orchestra!
I think I envy everything about him. I mean, his sheer control. He seems to be utterly relaxed. He's the best actor, I think, for looking and listening to people. When you see him simply watching someone, he looks them right in the eyes, and he's really looking at them. It's not just that his eyes are pointed in their direction. He's sort of entering their brain somehow, and it's totally real. It's not. It seems to me, it's not overdone. It's not hammy. It's not a performance. It is real acting.
Thank you, and bravo, Miss Qualthorpe, bravo, ladies. Just hold it one moment, will you, please?
He would improvise on a moment and put doubt and fear and anxiety and panic and glee and misery, and they'd follow each other in such swift succession that if you were playing opposite him, I imagine you'd just have to wait till he'd finished.
The condition of the place is indescribable. Dust and dirt everywhere, and the staff seem to match their surroundings. At all events, I've seen quite enough to know that it's no place to bring well-brought-up girls to. And
Leave that last statement, madam, and now will you kindly remove yourself from my chair, my desk, my telephone?
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
I said, will you kindly remove yourself from my telephone?
Will you please refrain from interfering? I don't know who you are, but I'm in the middle of an important conversation with the ministry. Hello? Where?
Telephone.
Will you desist at once, sir?
Madam, leave me no alternative.
How dare you, sir?
How dare you, madam? Hello, this is Weatherby Pond speaking, the headmaster of Nutburn College. Look, I don't want your sympathy, man. I want action. I want these women removed, bag and baggage. And if the last train is gone, you must lay on a special. Anyway, I'm not putting down this telephone until I know what you're going to do about it.
I demand compensation. What have we done with it? My wallet gone.
The most remarkable physical comedian. I mean, and certainly for me, the funniest. I mean, just funny. I mean, aside from wit and cleverness, just plain funniness, which comes from somewhere else. It's a sort of strange thing, like an infection that hits you when you look at him.
My name is Taggart. I'm a detective.
You don't look like a detective.
Oh, that's my chief value. You see, I don't look very sensible.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, it's very kind of you, Captain, to spare my feelings, but, well, I know what I look like. You see, my father was frightened just before I was born.
Father? Mother?
Oh, nothing could frighten Mother.
He's wonderful. Frightened man. Like Chaplin was a little man up against the elements, so was Alistair Sim, this tall, dignified man who was terrified of the world, really. He was a little boy that never grew up, frightened still of the world. One of his typical things was a loose overcoat, so that when he could spin, it would flare out. That sort of sharp turns. He'd whip round, great, very, lots of agility. There was that feeling of a scarecrow figure, that could have been the essence of his personality. They wanted these sharp edges to his outline.
Well, I met him because we were both playing in an amateur production of W.B. Yeats' play, The Land of Heart's Desire. And I was playing the fairy child. I was then aged 12. And he was playing the priest. He looked much older than he really was. In fact, when I saw him for the first time, I thought he must be at least 40. And he was 27. He was already a lecturer at New College, Edinburgh, lecturing to budding parsons and teaching them how not to speak with the parsonic voice. And one or two of them wrote to him much later when he was on the stage and asked if he could give them an introduction to that because they'd lost their faith. I thought it largely due to Alistair, I expect.
Is the minister ready for his cloak?
Aye. All right, Margaret. Have you got my gloves, Jessie? Mm-hmm. You've just your bonnet to put on, haven't you? That's a good girl. Don't let the boys be late, Margaret. It looks awful bad, the minister's family coming straggling in. And you remember to give them the threepenny bits for the collection? Oh, titch, 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 there's the bell. Oh, Margaret, don't forget to blow your nose loud if I preach over the 20 minutes. My hat, Jessie. What are you sucking?
A peppermint.
Now, well, give them to me till after the kirk. I can't abide to see you sucking them during the sermon. It always makes my mouth water.
We married when I was 18, but that was after we'd come to London. He'd always wanted to be a director more than anything else, and he was told by people in the theatre, you haven't a hope of coming down from Edinburgh and becoming a director in London. What you'll have to try to do is get yourself onto the stage, first of all, and come to it through acting. So he had various introductions and got into the Paul Robeson Othello, where Peggy Ashcroft was playing Desdemona.
He was appalled to discover that in the small parts he was playing, the audience's attention was drawn towards him because they wanted to laugh at what he was doing, though he didn't think what he was doing was funny. And with some reluctance, and then, of course, great joy, he discovered that he could make people laugh.
Did you get any time off?
After we close, till we open again.
What about taking a punt and having a watercress tea with me up the river?
You're not backward in coming forward, are you?
Oh, what do you say?
All right, then. 2:30, outside.
That's a deal. But on one condition.
What's that?
That you let me pay my share. Yes? Yes?
The first impression I had of Alistair, and I've never forgotten it, was when I think I was about 13, and I'd seen a film at the Gaumont in Morden, where I lived, Alf's Button Afloat. And I was so fascinated by Alistair, I waited at the end to see what his name was.
Master, behold thy slave.
Who are you?
I am Abdalullah Dalilajib, the slave of yonder button.
Button?
Yonder button. On thy raiment.
You mean this dirty old Greek?
Speak no ill of the talisman. That was once the lamp of my former master, the Lord Aladdin.
Little did I know, in a couple of years' time, I was going to be working with him.
Who are you? I'm Nero, the wickedest tyrant that ever laid hand on a knife. I slew my own brother and then killed my mother and finally murdered my wife. I poisoned my closest companions and beheaded the heads of the state. And remarkable feature, I murdered my teacher.
Ah, that makes you Nero the Great.
And I had to say, that wasn't just cruel, that was wasting good fuel. And that's what I call a real crime, and I hit him on the head with his violin.
Well, that wasn't just cruel, that was wasting good fuel. And that's what I call a real crime.
And we shot that at what was laughingly known as Marylebone Studios, which was, you had to go in through the church to get to it. Very odd, particularly if there was mass going on or something early in the morning.
I've been remembering the war years. You know, spam, dried egg, dried milk, reconstituted potatoes. But what an abundance of spirituality, Michael. Symphony concerts, Shakespeare's plays, touring all over the place, lunchtime recitals and poetry readings, and the converts flocked to us. They simply flocked.
His approach to acting changed as soon as the war came. He then became a human being on the stage instead of an actor. And the funny thing is, in the old days, the audiences didn't expect to see a real human on the stage. They were perfectly happy to see somebody acting. But the change was necessary and absolutely right. And he progressed from there.
How many times have I told you don't cuddle him? The more they cuddle, the more they cry. The more they cry, the more they cuddle. It's a vicious circle. Probably explains Hitler. Heard from Jim?
Yes. Had an airgraph from him yesterday. He's fine.
Nothing much wrong with Coulter Jr. either. Be a good citizen if you bring him up like I tell you. We'll need good citizens when this is all over. Millions of them. The more the merrier.
Another bedtime, another turn. Oh, it's good to be back in harness again.
Ah, yes, for some, just routine. But for us, my dear Prudence, the breath of life. Listen. Term has begun.
Morning, Millie.
Clarence. Clarence, I thought I'd made it abundantly clear from my letter that I had expelled Arabella.
Yes, I know, Millie, I know.
Goodness knows I've been lenient with her to the point of imbecility, Clarence.
Monica Drew wasn't expelled when she burnt down the gymnasium.
The gymnasium was insured. The sports pavilion was not.
I appreciate the distinction, Millie.
I can no longer afford to have continual arson about in my school. I had to make an example.
I remember watching that film and not realising that he was a man. You know, I mean, he plays a man and a woman in it, but when he played the female character, I had no idea. And I remember my sister telling me afterwards and saying, "Oh, that was Alistair Sim. He's great." And I said, no, that was a woman. How can he have my name? How can he be called Alistair? You know. And she said, no, that was a man.
Really, Clarence, you're a disgrace to the family.
I'd hardly call you a credit to it, Millie.
I remember I had a photograph from the film, a publicity stills, with him as Miss Fritton and as her brother, which I showed everybody as my parents, which I thought was a nice gag.
It is, I think, in the light of things like Mrs. Doubtfire and Tootsie, it is, I think, the best performance I've seen as a woman given by a man. I mean, vocally, it's wonderful because whereas Dustin Hoffman puts his voice up and does all that sort of, my name's Dorothy Michaels and I'm pleased to meet you. And the similar thing with Robin Williams, he puts his voice up quite high when he's Mrs. Doubtfire. Alistair Sim didn't do that. And if ever I have to do, female voice on something, I think it's a trap that people fall into, and I try not to do that as well, because you can do a woman's voice with a very light touch, which is really what Alistair Sim did in that part. It was his voice, but just with that little bit of lighter quality, and also physically he didn't camp it up in that film at all. He just, watching it again recently, he just has a slight looseness around the neck, and he plays with his beads and just moves his neck slightly, and that's as much as you get. Very realistic and very subtle. I was convinced.
I fancy it will be muffins for tea.
Exquisite detail. There's a lot of comedy that is, look at me, aren't I funny? And that, of course, never existed with Alistair. He had an obsession with the moment, the concentrated focus of his terror, his sense of destruction, was what created these high points of comedic achievement.
My name is Fritton, Millicent Fritton. I'm headmistress here.
Oh, no, lady.
Oh, you do? Well, I'm afraid I don't know you. Do you mind telling me your name?
Harry.
Harry? Oh, Harry was the name of a boot boy I engaged in 1940.
That's me.
In 1940. I had been playing in the musical White Horse Inn at the London Coliseum, and I was understudying a young actor in that. And he went to audition for a part in a play, and his mother, who was our chaperone at the time, asked me if I'd like to go along and watch, because there were going to be some famous people there. And I did. And by some accident of fate, I got auditioned and I got the job. And that was working in Cottage to Let with Alistair.
Put that down. I'm sorry. What are you doing here?
I'm here for my health, and what's it to you anyway? What are you doing with my luggage?
Your luggage.
Yes, my luggage.
Tell me, Sonny. This is Thrale Cottage, isn't it?
It is.
Most extraordinary.
It was all such a lark to me then. I mean, being paid money to be a dirty little evacuee who swore on stage, it was wonderful.
George was supposed to be about 12-year-old in the play. He was actually 15, but he looked much younger, and he wasn't very tall at that time anyway. In shorts, of course. And he was a very funny boy. And Alistair asked him to come down and stay a weekend with us, which he did. It was a great success. We loved it. So he came down for various weekends. And then the war was on, and so he was an adopted boy, in fact, himself. And he came as our evacuee at first, and then just gradually settled into our family.
Well, I think the truth is I moved in, and Naomi's still trying to get rid of me.
Harry.
Yeah. What about my 10%?
5.
7.5.
Down.
See you later, educator.
Well, it's very difficult to talk about what you've learned when you've been so close to someone. You're not conscious, certainly as a young actor, of learning specific things. But always when it's too late, you realize you are assimilating things all the time. I can remember part of the process in trying to teach me how to think. We'd be out on a walk with Alistair and Naomi, and they would tell me to go and stand in front of a tree. And as soon as I stood in front of it, they said, no, it's not the front, it's the back. And this went on for quite a time. And they said, no, you're obviously not very good with trees. Let's wait till we get back and we'll try you with a golf ball. And this back and the front of a golf ball and the back and the front of a tree was the beginning of my learning to think. They enjoyed it more than I did.
I'm sorry, George.
He was a deeply caring person about everything. And with this passion for teaching and for teaching young people, particularly getting them to think for themselves. And great fun, too.
There is a distinct possibility that I may be translated to a higher sphere.
Not your heart again, sir.
My heart is perfectly all right, Billings. No, I've been urged to consider an appointment elsewhere.
Alistair Sim, star of stage, screen and television, is installed as rector of Edinburgh University. The students gave him an uproarious welcome as he was carried from McEwen Hall to the Students' Union in the traditional form of transport.
I am a rector. I'm currently serving my second term at Dundee University, and anyone has to have these installations and make a speech to the young, as it were. It's a very difficult thing to do. You know, you don't want to sound pompous. You know that no one ever takes advice. You don't feel you have any right to tell young people how to behave. What on earth do you talk about for 40 minutes? And Alistair Sim just delivered this most astonishing address, which was incredibly funny and quite beautiful in its understanding, its ethics, its morality, the beauty of its ideas, and the absolute freedom of its thought.
Well, students of Edinburgh, you have made me extraordinarily happy. I have addressed a profusion of words at you, and whether they have made sense or nonsense, I have no means of judging. But I promise you that they were the best I had to offer. However that may be, my happiness is the greater for the knowledge of one thing, that there is one gift that we do share, and shall always share, the gift of laughter.
He was quite clearly not just an extraordinary actor, but also an extraordinary man. He trusted young people. He thought that anyone over 30 shouldn't have the vote, for example, quite seriously. They thought the world should be run by young people. The danger of growing older was that you would grow foolish, in his view.
I mean, he changed my outlook on life for lots of different things. He was a world citizen, you know. When I was growing up, I was very nationalistic and different things like that. Ali changed your idea of all these things and made you feel part of the grand scheme.
Ah, yes. I can see the question in your hungry eyes. You want to know what is lifemanship. Well, gentlemen, lifemanship is the science of being one up on your opponents at all times. It is the art of making him feel that somewhere, somehow, he has become less than you. Less desirable, less worthy, less blessed. Who then, you ask, are your opponents? Everybody, in a word, who is not you. And the purpose of your life must be to be one up on them, because, and mark this well, he who is not one up is one down.
He wasn't adamant about things. You would say a certain thing and he would guide you in an area and let you keep speaking, and you'd speaking until you've dug a great big hole for yourself in this philosophical argument, and then he'd say why, and then you wouldn't know why. So, and then that would be it.
You seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector.
We often do in the young ones, Mrs. Burling. They're more impressionable.
I suppose two things that make him so extraordinary. One is the voice, with that Edinburgh diction, the hard, every consonant, hard and hard. You just hear the voice in every consonant so beautifully, so exquisitely phrased, everything.
An enchanting boy.
He also had a rising inflection, which he used quite a lot in his voice. And I think that's very interesting, because I don't think he did this on purpose. It's just a byproduct. But as he talked, he'd often, go up at the end of the sentence and, do you think so? And it was almost an insecurity that his characters had. He played a lot of isolated figures, lots of priests or teachers. And it's almost as if by doing that at the end of the sentence, he's saying, please, listen to me, come to me, don't go away, no, I want you,
I'm in some confusion here. Sir Joshua, my notes tell me that Mr. Partridge here is a member of, a senior partner of Partridge, Wren and Finch. A nest of, a firm of stockbrokers, is that right?
That is so, my lord.
Yes, and as such, he is present now as an expert witness.
He is, my lord.
Possibly I'm getting deaf, Sir Joshua, but, it sounded as if you'd asked him something about star-crossed lovers.
Well, I did, my lord.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Partridge. Please, let us have your opinion on, what was it, Sir Joshua?
Star-crossed lovers, my lord.
Star-crossed lovers.
Well, my lad, I imagine that lovers, being ex hypothesi in a romantic and generally frivolous state of mind, may observe the stars and imagine that they are in some way influenced by them.
Yes, but they have no direct effect.
Well, speaking for myself and Mrs. Partridge, I can assure the court that the stars have had no noticeable effect upon our pre-matrimonial activities.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'd just begun to hope that even stockbrokers...
I first met Alistair Sim when we read through the very first script. And when he arrived, we were in some awe of him, because he had a reputation that carried all before him. And he turned out to be gracious, delightful, very funny, and completely and utterly relaxed. And the very first thing that he did after the read-through was to notice that his part was rather larger than he'd hoped, and there were whole pages of summing up. So he just casually ripped them out of the script and said, oh, I can do those 2 pages with a look, or 2 or 3. And so he did.
He had a wonderful quality of stillness, too, so that when the muscles of the eyes moved, you went right with them, you know.
He had various strict rules. For instance, he would never, ever sign an autograph. And I remember, to my embarrassment, asking him to sign an autograph because one of my friends' parents had a daughter who was ill, and they wanted desperately to get Alistair Sim's autograph. And even when I told him this sad story, he said, no, I don't do it. I've never signed one. I'm never going to. I think it's silly. The whole business is ridiculous, signing autographs, and I'm not going to start now.
Might I have your autograph, please?
I say he didn't believe in celebrity status, but there were the odd time that he did make something of it. We were stopped once by a policeman for speeding, and the policeman was quite nice about it, but Ali rolled down the window and took off his dark glasses and used his full, I can only call it charisma, really, and apologised profusely and said he wouldn't do it again. He was really very sorry. And the policeman got quite shirty and sent us on our way with a plenary. He didn't give us a ticket, but he got a bit narky. And we drove off. And Ali said, why did he turn so nasty? I thought I was being delightful. I said, well, you were being delightful, but you were also holding his hand and calling him darling.
He was at a time when the West End was very much a place where stars could arrive in vehicles which were less interesting than the star that they were carrying. And he liked 8 performances a week, and he liked feeling that he could fill a house. He always had the same deal with the management. He wouldn't accept any money until the production costs for the play had been paid off, and then he would get a very hefty percentage of the take.
Since I was 5, it seems that I've done nothing else but stagnate. But now at last, those days are past. Behold, a business magnate. We know that every dog must have his day, and now I'm lord of all that I survey. I seat myself upon my throne and shout my orders down the phone and record a speech on the dictaphone. Oh, I'm a great big businessman. My picture on the finance page will very shortly be the rage. Who knows, we may go on the stage. Now I'm a great big businessman. The daily press will never want for news. They'll only need to print my views. I'm going to set the business world on fire. Members of the stock exchange will shake in their shoes because they know that I am something new. They don't know what I may not do. Will you grant my paper an interview? I wonder if I ought to ring up the Bank of England. Hello, operator. Is that you? Oh, I just wanted to know. Operator, that was me speaking. Carry on. I ring for everyone at once, or go to Nice for months and months and join the Quan and the Barclay hunts. Now I'm a great big businessman. My office would not be complete without your sympathetic bleat. Pray come inside and take a seat. Now we're both big businessmen.
Surely you have heard of the British film crisis.
I thought it was over.
Oh, my dear girl, what with television to the left of us, Hollywood to the right of us, and the government behind us, our industry, laughable term, is forever on the brink.
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Miss
Clark.
Miss Clark. Miss Clark, when I tell you that in the past my films have been so successful that no other producer in the country has lost less money, you will understand how ludicrously impossible the whole situation has become. Have you had any lunch?
No, sir.
No? You can have half my bun.
Thank you, sir.
His sense of danger was thrilling.
Excuse fingers.
He took you to the cliff edge, the brink of seduction. But it never gets out of hand. But the danger's there, and you hope it'll happen. And then you feel ashamed, thinking, oh, no, well, of course not, no.
You know, it's a pity I can't help you, but I don't mind admitting that I find you a remarkably attractive young woman. Time was when I'd have been quite unable to resist briskly pursuing you around this desk, clockwise or anti-clockwise. They came equally to me. Though I always thought I ran better on a right-hand course. Folie de jeunesse, where are you now?
I found him very funny, but there was a sinister quality about him. On screen, never off, but on screen there was that little, you mustn't mess with this character, so you couldn't help but watch.
Your fate is in my hands. You've only got 5 seconds to live. Pistol barked. There came a spurt of yellow flame. Pike's nostrils were assailed by the familiar smell. Correction. Aroma.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
We thought we was going to be murdered.
And the door was open.
Oh. What a jape, eh?
And initially you think, oh, what a lovely bumbling man, and, you know, he's full of joy, and, oh, how do you do, and what are you boys doing here, and all that sort of thing. And then he offers them a drink when he realises who they are.
One moment, do I think this calls for a little liquid refreshment, eh?
You do wonder what he's going to get them to drink, don't you? You think, oh my God, I wouldn't want to be in that room.
Ginger pop. Go along now, fellows. Help yourselves. No. Not that one.
And they think it must be laced with poison. And you can believe that it would be. But then he says,
Mine has gin in it. Bung-hoo!
Quite often, when people find out that my father was Alistair Sim, and they say, oh, yes, I remember him, he was awfully good, what was that film he did? Oh, The Lady Killers, he was wonderful in that. Well, of course, he didn't do The Lady Killers. Alec Guinness did that. But Alec Guinness did the most wonderful impersonation of Ali, or what seemed to be an impersonation of him.
You have a room to let?
The lower ground floor?
Single room, gas ring, part use bath.
Yes. It's very late.
It is always later than we think.
Would you like to see it?
Thank
you. It's downstairs.
Naturally.
Wilberforce?
Yes.
I understand you have rooms to let.
Although Alec Guinness might have got the money, Ali got a lot of kudos for that film, I think. He was very good in it.
Most exhilarating.
Milk and sugar, Mr. Squares?
Both, if I may. And 2 lumps, please. I like it very sweet and rather milky. Thank you. How very delightful of you to invite me, Mrs. Vizard. And what a charming room. Have you lived long in this house, Mrs. Vizard?
I came here as a bride.
So, and is it long ago since Mr. Vizard passed over?
1922, Michaelmas Quarter Day.
And since then you have been solitary?
I've been quite content. The departed left me provided for.
Even a material consolation is something, however small.
Yes.
How very strange. I see now how wrong I was. Do you know that when I first met you, I took you to be a much older person? I took you to be almost middle-aged.
Yes, he's flirting with her. And you think, and I think she thinks as well, that he could just as easily kiss her as kill her.
Henry Squales, have you sunk so low as to do this thing? There can only be one answer. Yes, you have.
A Merry Christmas, Ebenezer! You old humbug! And a Happy New Year, as if you deserved it.
He is the perfect Dickensian character because he can sort of inhabit what should be a caricature, a sort of absolute sort of paradigm version of a Scrooge, you know, of somebody in a nightshirt with that sort of hair, you know, which usually the fizz illustrations in Dickens or something create, but you feel that no actor can really live up to because it's not something you can really be, and he just sort of becomes Scrooge for all time, and yet it is always Alistair Sim.
Look, Mr. Dilver, there's the corner where the Spirit of Christmas present sat, and there's the door where Jacob Marley's ghost came through, and there's the window where I saw the wandering spirit. It's right, it's true, it all happened. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been amongst the spirits. I don't know anything. I never did know anything. But now I know that I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I never did know anything. But now I know that I don't know. All on the Christmas morning. I must stand on my head. I must stand on my head.
On screen, he was contained within the limitations of the medium. But on stage was an entirely different personality. He was a clown. He was a creative, tragicomic performer who would take any piece of business, or shtick as the Americans call it, and develop it and develop it. He had an insatiable lust for laughter. He'd keep developing this bit of business from one idea to another and interlock them until he'd got maybe the audience laughing for 6 minutes non-stop.
The magistrate was and is considered to be Alistair Sim at his peak, and I think secretly he would agree to that. He had a piece of business all on his own with a wash basin and a piece of soap and his braces that he couldn't quite get to button up at the back, which I used to go down into the wings every night to watch.
He comes back from the night out at a club and has to, in his office, get himself redressed from his night out into his office clothes. And he washes on stage. And every night he managed to make it look pure chance that having washed his hands and mopped his face, the soap flew out of his hands into the first row of the audience. And he could get soap in his eye so realistically that you found your own eyes watering. And then he'd wipe his face with the front of his shirt and tuck his shirt back into the trousers, and you could feel the wetness down his trousers. You found yourself feeling uncomfortable with him. And he took you into his mood so clearly that you were there with him night after night after night. It was fresh every time, and yet each time it made it look like chance. It was very clever. Biased as I am.
He was recalling the mayhem that had happened the night before when he, the magistrate, had been caught in some entirely inappropriate situation, and he was berating the person who had got himself into these scrapes and pointing rather expansively and saying, "Who was this man who'd done this terrible thing?" And then began to answer his own question, and the finger came back and began to point at the magistrate, who then went into a characteristic Alistair pose, and the finger came rather gently to rest on his lips as he said, "Oh, dearie, dearie me, what troubles have I got myself into?" But Alistair, I think, as a man, knew how to get out of the scrapes. The characters he played didn't always know that.
You'll stand clear, won't you, George?
Yes, sir.
Just a matter of energy, you know, foot-pounds and so forth. Now, let me see.
He could make his body do things that I wouldn't have thought that body was capable of. So I didn't think of him as physically all that able. And yet on stage he could do things very physical.
You can see that he must have absorbed qualities from the great silent comics, you know, from the Stan Laurels, from the Keatons. And there's a scene in particular in Laughter in Paradise when he's standing outside the jeweller's shop and he's got a brick in his hand and he is trying to throw the brick through the window.
And he's about to put the brick through it when somebody comes the other side of the window and so he backs away and then he takes the brick and he swings it rather like somebody who's going to bowl it, you know. And as he throws it forward,
Why, Captain Russell. I thought you were going away.
Yes, I am going very shortly now.
What have you got there?
A brick.
Brick.
As he stands there, every reaction is plotted so carefully. You know, the worry, the desire, the fear. And I'm sure that must have come from having a great knowledge and admiration for those great silent comics.
then what was so interesting, a policeman comes up and said, "Did you throw that brick through the window?" He said, "Yes, I did," and bangs him over the head with the umbrella.
Did you do that? Yes, he did. I saw him.
And I have a feeling that that was Alistair Sim's joke. It was something he put in that banged him over the head, just to make sure he got to prison.
You never knew what he was going to do next. He never seemed to make the choice that would be there on the script. I mean, it seemed absolutely natural and right, but I bet if anybody looked at the screenplay, at the actual script written down, and it just says, you know, this character says this line, has this reaction, you would think most actors would do this, that, or the other, and he will always surprise you.
I am not mad. Even if I look...
76 was not a bad time to go, and he had had a wonderful life. He accepted a CBE, but he did turn down a knighthood. He felt it would, the way that one is addressed as a separate title would make a difference. A CBE nobody knows about anyway.
He was a very private man. He didn't give interviews. He didn't gladly accept fools. He didn't want people to get to know him too soon, but when you got to know him, you were privileged to know a man of great warmth and compassion, you know, and genius. I think he was, without question, our greatest comedy actor.
Very gentle comedy. It's the sort of comedy I love. You know, it's not aggressive comedy. It's not loud. And to get his laughs, he did the most understated, delicate things. And any student of comedy should watch him.
He really had a kind of wisdom and belief in people that is now so gone. Everyone's so self-centered. I hope he was a happy man. He deserved to be.
What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time, sir.
Well, we won't beat about the bush, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. Which leaves me no alternative but to raise your salary. I haven't taken leave of my senses, Bob. I've come to them. From now on, I want to try to help you to raise that family of yours. If you'll let me. Well, we'll talk it over later, Bob, over a bowl of hot punch. Meanwhile, you just go and put some more coal in that fire. You go straight out and buy a new coal scuttle. Yes, and you do that before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
When I was doing Minder, the first series, every Thursday night I would imagine around about 9 o'clock, a roll of thunder and one or two tiles coming off the roof, and a voice saying, "This is not what I trained you for." But I like to think he would have enjoyed it.
I don't deserve to be so happy. I can't help it. I just can't help it.
He was quite clearly not just an extraordinary actor, but also an extraordinary man.
We shall not see his like again, really not.